Welcome to Sinister Media, where the darkness comes alive. I'm your host, and tonight, we're diving into the shadows of Halloween. Prepare yourself for 6 true Halloween tales that will terrify you. These aren't just stories, they're real experiences that will make you question what's lurking in the dark. Make sure your doors are locked, your lights are on, and you're ready to face your fears. Because once you hear these tales, you'll never look at Halloween the same way again. Let's begin.
I never believed in ghosts. That is, until I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. Now, I'm not sure what I believe anymore, or if I'll live long enough to figure it out. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. Or perhaps I should say our story. You'll understand soon enough. It all began on a crisp autumn day when I first laid eyes on the house. It stood apart from its neighbors, its weathered facade and intricate gingerbread trim hinting at a bygone era. The real estate agent, a nervous man with darting eyes, seemed eager to close the deal. "It's a steal at this price," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The previous owners left rather abruptly. Family emergency, I believe. I should have seen the red flags. The price that was too good to be true, the agent's nervous demeanor, the way the shadows seemed to cling to the corners of each room. But I was too caught up in the excitement of owning my first home, but too blinded by the potential I saw in those high ceilings and hardwood floors. The day I moved in, I felt it. As I lugged boxes up the creaking stairs, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. Something about the house felt off, like it was watching me, assessing me. I shrugged it off as new house jitters and focused on unpacking. The first few weeks were uneventful, save for the usual quirks of an old house. Creaking floorboards, rattling pipes, the occasional unexplained draft. But as Halloween approached, things began to change. It started with noises from the attic, soft at first, barely noticeable. A scrape here, a thud there. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe mice in the walls. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something worse. The noises grew louder as Halloween drew nearer. Footsteps pacing back and forth, doors slamming shut, and once, a blood-curdling scream that jolted me awake in the middle of the night. Each time I investigated, I found nothing but dust and shadows. I tried to rationalize it. I was stressed from work, from the move. My imagination was running wild in a new, unfamiliar space. But the incidents kept escalating. One night, I woke to find all the faucets in the house running full blast, the sinks overflowing. Another day, I came home to find every piece of furniture in the living room stacked in a precarious tower that reached the ceiling. I called in experts, plumbers, electricians, even a team of paranormal investigators. They found nothing. No faulty wiring, no leaky pipes, no EMF readings off the charts. According to them, the house was perfectly normal. But I knew better. I could feel the malevolence growing day by day. The house was alive, and it was hungry. As Halloween approached, my fear turned to determination. I was not going to be driven from my home by whatever force was at work here. On Halloween night, I decided to confront it head-on. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my dwindling courage, I made my way to the attic. As I ascended the narrow stairs, the temperature dropped dramatically. My breath clouded in front of me, and frost began to form on the flashlight's beam. The attic was a cluttered mess of forgotten furniture and mildewed boxes. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. In the far corner stood an old chest, its dark wood scarred and pitted with age. As I approached the chest, the whispers started. Unintelligible at first, but growing clearer with each step I took. They were calling my name, beckoning me closer. My hand trembled as I reached for the latch. Inside the chest, nestled among yellowed papers and moth-eaten fabrics, was a photograph. I picked it up, brushing off decades of dust. My blood ran cold as I recognized the face staring back at me. It was me, but not me. An older version, perhaps, with hollow eyes and a grim expression. The woman in the photo wore clothes from another era, but the resemblance was undeniable. Beneath the photo was a letter addressed to me in spidery handwriting. With shaking hands, I unfolded it and began to read. To the one who bears my face, if you're reading this, then the cycle continues. I am you, and you are me. trapped in an endless loop of terror and despair. This house is not just haunted, it is a prison, a place where time folds in on itself. I came here as you did, seeking a fresh start. Instead, I found a nightmare from which there is no waking. The entity that dwells here feeds on fear and suffering. It lured me in, as it has lured you, with the promise of a new beginning. But there is no escape. I have lived this Halloween night 1,000 times, always ending up in this attic, always finding this letter, always hoping that this time somehow it will be different. It never is. Perhaps you will be stronger than I was. Perhaps you will find a way to break the cycle. But I fear that, like me, you are already lost. May God have mercy on our soul. Elizabeth. As I finished reading, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with the woman from the photograph. Her eyes were black pits, her skin pale and translucent. She opened her mouth in a silent scream, and I felt myself being pulled into darkness. What followed was a nightmare beyond comprehension. I found myself reliving moments from a life I had never lived. Or had I? I saw myself in different eras, always in this house, always ending up in this attic. I was Elizabeth in the 1920s, a young bride moving into her new home, full of hope for the future. I felt her growing dread as the house revealed its true nature, her desperation as she tried to escape, only to find herself trapped in an endless loop. I was Mary in the 1890s, a widow seeking solace in the grand old house on Maple Street. I experienced her slow descent into madness as the house tormented her, twisting her grief into something dark and terrible. I was Sarah, myself, in the present day, watching helplessly as I read the letter, as I turned to face Elizabeth's ghost. I wanted to scream, to warn myself, but I was powerless to intervene. Through it all, I felt the presence of the house, or rather, the entity that inhabited it. It was ancient, malevolent, and hungry. It fed on our fear, our suffering, our very essence, and it was never satisfied. I don't know how long I was trapped in that limbo between worlds. Time has no meaning in this place. When I came to, I was back in the attic, the letter clutched in my trembling hands. But something had changed. The house felt different, expectant, almost excited. And I understood why. Because now I was no longer just Sarah. I was Elizabeth, and Mary, and all the others who had come before. Their memories, their experiences, their terror, it was all a part of me now. I tried to leave, of course. I ran down the stairs, burst out the front door, only to find myself back in the attic, the cycle beginning anew. I tried burning the house down, only to watch the flames flicker and die, leaving everything untouched. I even tried to end my own life, but death, it seems, is a luxury not afforded to those trapped here. I've lost count of how many times I've relived that Halloween night, how many times I've climbed those attic stairs, how many times I've read that letter. Each time I try something different. Each time I fail. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the outside world through the windows. I see families moving in, full of hope and excitement for their new home. I want to warn them, to tell them to run while they still can. But I can't. I'm trapped, a silent observer to the horror that's about to unfold. And now, as I write this letter, the same letter I've written countless times before, I wonder about the next poor soul who will find it. Will she be strong enough to break the cycle? Or will she too become another ghost in the attic, another victim of this house's insatiable hunger? I hear footsteps on the stairs. It's starting again. Another Halloween, another chance at freedom that I know will slip through my grasp. But this time, something feels different. The air is charged with a malevolent energy I've never felt before. The entity is evolving, growing stronger with each cycle, and I fear that soon it will no longer be content with this house, with us. It will find a way to break free, to spread its evil beyond these walls. If you're reading this, it may already be too late, but on the slim chance that you still have a choice, that you haven't yet crossed the threshold, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Don't look back, don't hesitate, because once you enter this house, once you become a part of its history, there's no escape. I hear the doorknob turning. She's here, I'm here, to read the letter, to face the ghost, to begin the cycle anew. But maybe this time, no. I can't afford to hope. Hope is a luxury for the living, and I'm not sure I qualify anymore. Welcome to the house. Welcome to eternity. Welcome to hell. The door opens and I turn to face myself once more, wondering if this time, finally, something will change. But deep down, I know the truth. The house always wins.
Hey there, fellow movie lovers. Today, we're diving into the dark, twisted world of The Lighthouse, a mind-bending psychological thriller that's making waves on Amazon Prime. But before we get into that, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more movie recommendations. Picture this, two lighthouse keepers, stranded on a remote island. A relentless storm. Isolation. Madness. That's The Lighthouse in a nutshell, folks. Directed by the visionary Robert Eggers and starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, this isn't your average horror flick. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another horror movie. Seen it all before. Trust me, you haven't seen anything like this. Shot in black and white with an almost square aspect ratio, The Lighthouse isn't just a movie, it's an experience. Don't just take my word for it. Rolling Stone calls it a gripping and turbulent tale of madness. The Guardian says, Dafoe and Pattinson are sensational. And Variety. They're calling it a throwback to experimental, boundary-pushing horror. Now, here's the best part. You can watch The Lighthouse right now on Amazon Prime. That's right, no need to brave the storm outside. Just curl up on your couch and let the madness come to you. But wait, there's more. With Amazon Prime, you're not just getting The Lighthouse. You're getting thousands of movies and TV shows. Ad-free music streaming. Free, fast shipping on millions of items. Exclusive deals. Free books and games. All for less than the price of a movie ticket each month. So, are you ready to lose your mind with The Lighthouse? Head over to Amazon Prime and start your free trial today. Trust me, once you enter the light, you may never see the world the same way again. This has been Sinister Media. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And remember, stay sane out there. If you can.
Growing up in the rural outskirts of Millbrook, a tiny town nestled in the heart of Nebraska, Halloween was always a quiet affair. Our nearest neighbors were a good mile down the road, and trick-or-treaters were as rare as rain in a drought. Most years, my parents would buy a bag of candy just in case, but it always ended up being our personal stash for the next few months. I was 15 the year everything changed. The year the stranger appeared at my window. It was early October, and the first chill of autumn had just begun to creep into the air. I remember sitting at my desk, working on a history paper that was due the next day. The sun had long since set, and the only light in my room came from my desk lamp and the soft glow of my computer screen. That's when I felt it. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired and imagining things. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. Slowly, I turned towards my window. And there he was. A man, tall and thin, standing just outside the glass. He wore a long, dark coat that seemed to blend into the night behind him. His face was shadowed, but I could feel his eyes on me, unwavering and intense. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I blinked, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But the chill running down my spine and the lingering sense of unease told me it had been real. Shaking, I ran downstairs to tell my parents. Mom was in the kitchen, finishing up the dishes from dinner, while Dad sat in his recliner watching the evening news. "There's someone outside," I blurted out, my voice trembling. "A man?" He was standing right outside my window. Dad was on his feet in an instant, grabbing the baseball bat we kept by the back door. Mom pulled me close, her arm around my shoulders as Dad went outside to check. We waited in tense silence for what seemed like hours before Dad came back in, shaking his head. "There's no one out there, sweetie," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "No footprints in the flower beds, no sign anyone's been around the house." "But I saw him," I insisted. "He was right there, looking in at me." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. Was it concern? Doubt? "Maybe it was just a shadow," Mom suggested gently, "or a reflection in the glass." "You've been working hard on that paper, honey. Your eyes might be playing tricks on you." I wanted to argue, to make them understand that what I'd seen was real, but I could see in their faces that they didn't believe me. So I nodded, mumbled something about being tired, and went back to my room. That night, I slept with my desk lamp on, my eyes constantly darting to the window. But the stranger didn't return. I tried to convince myself that my parents were right, that it had just been my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man at my window had been real. And somehow, I knew he'd be back. For the next few weeks, life went on as normal. I went to school, did my homework, helped out around the house. But always in the back of my mind was the memory of that night, the feeling of being watched, the shadowy figure outside my window. Then, exactly a week after the first sighting, it happened again. This time I was getting ready for bed. I had just turned off my main light and was about to climb under the covers when that familiar prickling sensation returned. Slowly, I turned towards the window. There he was. Same long, dark coat, same shadowy face, same intense stare. I didn't freeze this time. I ran. Out of my room, down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste to get to my parents. Once again, Dad went out to check. Once again, he found nothing. "I'm worried about you, honey," Mom said as we sat at the kitchen table, mugs of hot chocolate in front of us. "Have you been feeling okay lately? Any stress at school?" I shook my head, fighting back tears of frustration. "I'm fine, Mom. I know what I saw. He was there, I swear." Dad sat down across from me, his face serious. "Listen, kiddo, if you really think someone's out there, we'll call the sheriff tomorrow. But you have to understand if there's no evidence." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what he was thinking, that I was imagining things, that maybe I was losing my mind. The sightings continued, always at night, always when I was alone in my room. Sometimes he'd appear 2 nights in a row. Other times he'd stay away for a week or more. But he always came back. I started keeping a log, noting down every appearance. I drew pictures, trying to capture the details of what I saw. But no matter how hard I looked, I could never make out his face clearly. It was always in shadow, as if the darkness clung to him. My parents called the sheriff, but of course he found nothing. No signs of intruders, no footprints, no evidence at all that anyone had been lurking around our property. "Could be kids playing pranks," he suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Our house was too isolated for local teens to bother with. As October wore on and Halloween approached, the sightings became more frequent. The stranger would stay longer, sometimes for minutes at a time. And though he never moved, never tried to get in, I could feel his gaze growing more intense, more hungry. I stopped sleeping in my room, camping out on the living room couch instead. My grades started to slip. I became jumpy, paranoid. My parents talked in hushed voices when they thought I couldn't hear, discussing therapists and mental health evaluations. But I knew I wasn't crazy. The stranger was real. And somehow I knew that whatever he wanted, whatever he was waiting for, it would all come to a head on Halloween night. The day itself passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. I went through the motions at school, barely hearing my teachers or friends. All I could think about was what would happen when night fell. As the sun began to set, I locked myself in the living room, all the lights blazing. My parents, worried but not knowing what else to do, sat with me. We put on a movie, some lighthearted comedy, but none of us were really watching. The hours ticked by, 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Nothing happened, no sign of the stranger. For the first time in weeks, I began to relax. Maybe it was over, maybe he was gone for good. At 11:30, I decided to go to bed. My parents, relieved to see me calmer, wished me good night. I climbed the stairs to my room, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I should have known better. As soon as I opened my bedroom door, I felt it, that all too familiar sensation of being watched. Slowly, I turned towards the window. He was there, Closer than ever before, his face pressed against the glass. And for the first time, I could see his eyes. They were black. Entirely, impossibly black, like two holes cut into the fabric of reality. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink as those terrible eyes bored into me. Then he smiled. It was a horrible thing, that smile. Too wide, filled with teeth that were sharp and gleaming in the darkness. His hand rose, pressed against the glass. I watched in horror as it began to pass through, as if the window was nothing more than a sheet of water. That's when I screamed, a sound of pure terror that tore from my throat and echoed through the house. My parents' footsteps thundered up the stairs. I heard my dad shouting, my mom calling my name, but I couldn't look away from those eyes, that smile, that hand reaching for me. The door burst open behind me. In that instant, the stranger vanished, not stepping back or fading away, but simply ceasing to be between one heartbeat and the next. I collapsed, shaking and sobbing, as my parents rushed to me. Through my tears, I could see their faces, pale and frightened. They believed me now. They had seen him too, if only for a second. We moved out of that house the very next day, leaving most of our belongings behind in our haste to get away. We stayed with my aunt in the city for months while my parents looked for a new place, somewhere far from Millbrook and the memories of that Halloween night. Years have passed since then. I'm an adult now, with a family of my own. We live in a bustling suburb, about as far from rural isolation as you can get. I've been to therapy, worked through the trauma of that time, but every Halloween, I find myself looking out windows, scanning the darkness, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, a tall, thin figure in a long, dark coat. I tell myself it's just my imagination, a leftover fear from a terrifying time in my life. But deep down, I know the truth. He's still out there, still watching, still waiting, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if my parents hadn't reached my room when they did. What did the stranger want, and why, after all these years, do I still feel like it's not over? These questions haunt me, keeping me awake on long, dark nights. Because I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that someday I'll see those black eyes again.
I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, the paranormal, it all seemed like nonsense to me. Just stories people told to scare each other or explain away the unknown. That's why, when my friends suggested we go for a night hike in Blackwood Forest on Halloween, I didn't hesitate to agree. It sounded like fun, a nice break from the usual parties and trick-or-treating. There were 6 of us: me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Mia, our mutual friends Alex and Sarah's cousin Liam, who was visiting for the weekend. We'd all grown up in the small town of Millbrook, right on the edge of Blackwood Forest. We'd spent countless summer days exploring those woods, swimming in the creek that ran through it, having picnics in sun-dappled clearings. But we'd never gone in at night. Not on Halloween. You know the forest is haunted, right? Alex said as we gathered at the trailhead, adjusting his backpack. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled trees at the forest's edge. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't tell me you believe those old stories." "What stories?" Liam asked, looking between us with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Jake grinned, clearly relishing the chance to spook the newcomer. "They say that on Halloween night, the veil between our world and the spirit world thins. That's when the ghosts come out to play." "Ghosts?" Liam's voice cracked slightly. "Not just any ghosts," Mia chimed in, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "The spirits of those who died in these woods, hikers who got lost and never found their way out, victims of a serial killer who used to dump bodies here decades ago." I snorted, shaking my head. "Come on, guys. You're going to give Liam a heart attack before we even start the hike." "I'm fine," Liam protested, though he looked a shade paler in the moonlight. "Don't worry," I assured him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "It's all just stories. I've been coming to these woods my whole life, and the scariest thing I've ever seen is Jake trying to pee on a skunk." That got a laugh out of everyone, even Liam, and the tension eased. We switched on our flashlights and headed into the forest, the beams cutting through the darkness and creating eerie shadows among the trees. At first, it was exhilarating. The forest at night was a different world. Familiar paths looked strange and new in the darkness, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending a little thrill down my spine. We talked and laughed, our voices seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet of the woods. About an hour into our hike, we reached Widow's Peak, a rocky outcropping that offered a stunning view of the forest and the town beyond. We settled down to rest and have some snacks, passing around a thermos of hot chocolate. Perfect spot for some ghost stories, Alex suggested, waggling his eyebrows. Sarah groaned. Seriously? Aren't we a little old for that? You're never too old for a good scare, Jake countered. Come on, who wants to start? To my surprise, it was Liam who spoke up. I've got one, he said quietly. It's not really a story, though. It's something that happened to me. We all fell silent, turning to look at him. In the harsh beam of the flashlights, Liam's face looked drawn and serious. A couple of years ago, I was hiking alone in the mountains near my home, he began. I got turned around somehow, ended up way off the trail. It was getting dark, and I was starting to panic. That's when I saw her. Her? Mia prompted when Liam fell silent. He nodded slowly. A woman, standing between the trees. I don't know how to describe it. She looked solid, but somehow not quite there at the same time. Like a reflection in water. She didn't say anything, just pointed. I followed where she was pointing and found my way back to the trail. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. What do you think it was? I asked, surprised to hear a tremor in my voice. Liam shrugged. I don't know. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But sometimes I think, maybe it was the spirit of someone who died out there, trying to help so I didn't meet the same fate. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Despite myself, I found my eyes scanning the tree line, half expecting to see a spectral figure emerge from the shadows. Well, Jake said finally, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. Great story, Liam. Really creepy. Who's next? But the mood had shifted. No one else offered a story, and soon we were packing up to continue our hike. As we stood to leave, I noticed Mia frowning at her phone. Everything okay? I asked. She looked up, brow furrowed. Yeah, it's just... my GPS isn't working. Says there's no signal. Mine too, Alex added, holding up his own phone. A tendril of unease curled in my stomach. It's fine, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We know these woods like the back of our hands. We don't need GPS. But as we set off again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The trees seemed to press in closer, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The well-worn path we'd been following seemed to fade away, leaving us picking our way through undergrowth. Guys, Sarah said after we'd been walking for what felt like hours. I hate to say this, but I think we might be lost. We can't be, Jake insisted, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We just need to keep heading east. We'll hit the main trail eventually, but eventually never seemed to come. We walked and walked, the forest growing denser, the night darker. Our flashlight beams seemed weaker, barely penetrating the gloom. That's when I first heard it. A whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I stopped, straining my ears. Did you guys hear that? I asked. Hear what? Alex replied, but then his eyes widened. Wait, I hear it too. We all fell silent, listening. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from all around us, words just on the edge of comprehension, spoken in voices that were somehow both familiar and utterly alien. It's just the wind, Mia said, but her voice shook. Guys, Liam's voice was barely audible. Look, we turned to where he was pointing. Between the trees, just at the edge of our flashlight beams, something moved. A figure, tall and indistinct, there one moment and gone the next. Oh God, Sarah whimpered. Oh God, oh God, oh God. It's nothing, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just shadows and tricks of the light. We need to keep moving. But as we started walking again, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The whispers continued, rising and falling like waves, sometimes so quiet I could barely hear them, sometimes so loud they drowned out the sound of our footsteps. And the figures. They were everywhere now, flitting between trees, always just out of clear sight. Sometimes I thought I recognized them, a face from an old photograph, a person I'd seen in town but couldn't quite place. Other times they were utterly inhuman, shapes and forms that my mind couldn't quite comprehend. We walked faster, then faster still, until we were practically running through the forest. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us at every step. The whispers had become a cacophony, 1,000 voices all speaking at once in languages I didn't understand. That's when I made the mistake of looking back. It was following us, a figure, cloaked in shadow, moving with a speed and grace that was utterly inhuman. I caught a glimpse of eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light, fixed directly on me. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed and I ran, blind panic taking over. I could hear the others shouting, their voices filled with the same terror that gripped me. We burst out of the tree line so suddenly I almost fell. Gasping for breath, I spun around, expecting to see the shadowy figure right behind us, but there was nothing, just the dark line of trees, silent and still. We were back at the trailhead. Somehow, in our panicked flight, we'd found our way back to where we started. For a long moment, none of us spoke. We just stood there, chests heaving, staring at the forest that now looked so ordinary, so harmless. What just happened? Liam finally asked, his voice hoarse. Nobody had an answer. We looked at each other, seeing our own shock and disbelief mirrored in each other's faces. Maybe we just got spooked, Jake suggested weakly. Got turned around and panicked. All of us? Sarah countered. All of us saw the same things, heard the same things. I wanted to agree with Jake, wanted to find some rational explanation for what we'd experienced, but I couldn't. The memory of those glowing eyes, of that figure moving through the forest with impossible speed, it was burned into my mind. We made our way back to town in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we reached the first streetlights, Mia spoke up. We don't have to talk about this, right? She said. We can just pretend it never happened. Part of me wanted to agree, to lock away the memory of that night and never think about it again. But I knew I couldn't. What we'd seen, what we'd experienced, it had changed something fundamental in how I viewed the world. No, I said quietly, we can't pretend it didn't happen. But maybe we can try to understand it. The others looked at me, a mix of fear and curiosity in their eyes. And I knew that while our Halloween hike was over, our journey into the unknown was just beginning. In the years since that night, we've researched, we've investigated, we've gone back to those woods countless times. We've never experienced anything quite like that Halloween night again. But sometimes, when the wind is right and the moon is full, I swear I can hear those whispers. And sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure, watching and waiting. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. There's something magical about a night when the ordinary world gives way to the extraordinary, when the lines between reality and fantasy blur. But I never expected to experience that blurring firsthand. Never expected to witness something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It happened 3 years ago, on a crisp October evening in the small town of Maplewood, where I'd lived all my life. I was 32, recently divorced, and for the first time in years, I found myself alone on Halloween night. My ex-wife Sarah had always been the one to take our daughter Emily trick-or-treating, while I stayed home to hand out candy. This year, with Sarah and Emily moved to the city, I debated whether to bother with Halloween at all. In the end, tradition won out. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing the neighborhood kids, some of whom I'd watched grow up over the years. So I bought a few bags of candy, carved a jack-o'-lantern, and settled in for the evening. The first few hours were uneventful. A steady stream of princesses, superheroes, and monsters came to my door, their excited voices filling the night air. I found myself smiling despite my melancholy, caught up in their enthusiasm. It was around 8:30 when she arrived, the little witch. I heard her before I saw her, the tap-tap-tap of small feet on the front walk, a quiet humming that sounded vaguely like a lullaby. When I opened the door, there she stood, a tiny figure silhouetted against the streetlights. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her costume was impeccable. A black dress that seemed to shimmer slightly in the porch light, a pointed hat perched atop long, dark hair. In her hand, she clutched a broomstick that looked old and worn, as if it had seen years of use. But it was her face that caught my attention, pale and solemn, with eyes that seemed too old, too knowing for a child her age. Those eyes fixed on me, and for a moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Trick or treat," she said, her voice soft and melodic. I blinked, shaking off the strange feeling. "Well, aren't you a scary little witch?" I said, reaching for the candy bowl. "Here you go, sweetie." As I dropped a handful of candy into her bag, she smiled. It was a small thing, barely a quirk of her lips, but it transformed her face. Suddenly, she looked like any other excited kid on Halloween night. "Thank you," she said, and then, almost as an afterthought, "Be careful what you wish for." Before I could respond, she turned and skipped down the walk. I watched her go, puzzled by her parting words. Had I mentioned wishing for anything? I couldn't remember. The little witch reached the sidewalk and turned left, her black dress swirling around her ankles. I saw her skip past one house, then another, and then she vanished. One moment she was there, a small dark figure against the yellow glow of the streetlights. The next, she was gone. No puff of smoke, no flash of light, just gone. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. It wasn't possible. People don't just disappear into thin air. I must have blinked or looked away for a second. She must have turned down a driveway or ducked behind a car. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew what I'd seen. The little witch had vanished as surely as if she'd never been there at all. I stepped out onto my porch, peering up and down the street. A group of older kids were approaching from the opposite direction, their laughter carrying on the night air. But of the little witch, there was no sign. "Hey," I called out to the approaching group. "Did you guys see a little girl in a witch costume come this way?" They looked at each other, then back at me, shaking their heads. "Nah, man," one of them said. "We didn't see nobody." I thanked them and retreated back into my house, my mind whirling. I must have imagined it. That was the only explanation that made sense. I was tired, emotional from the first Halloween without my family. My mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the memory of those knowing eyes, that enigmatic smile, the way she had seemed to shimmer slightly in the porch light, and those parting words, "Be careful what you wish for." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions of handing out candy, but my thoughts kept returning to the little witch. By the time the last trick-or-treaters had come and gone, I had almost convinced myself that I'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. The next morning, I woke early, unable to shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. On a whim, I decided to ask my neighbors if they'd seen the little witch. My first stop was Mrs. Abernathy next door, a kindly widow who'd lived on our street for as long as anyone could remember. She was out in her front yard, raking leaves. "Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy," I called out. "Quick question. Did you happen to see a little girl in a witch costume last night? Black dress, long dark hair." Mrs. Abernathy paused in her raking, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Why, yes, I did," she said. "Cutest little thing. Came to my door around 8:30 or so. Why do you ask?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Did you see where she went after she left your house?" Mrs. Abernathy frowned. "You know, that's the strangest thing. I could have sworn I watched her walk down to the sidewalk, but then, well, I must have gotten distracted. When I looked back, she was gone." I thanked her and moved on, my unease growing. I spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Chen across the street, to the Johnsons 2 doors down, to old Mr. Fitzgerald on the corner. The story was always the same. They all remembered the little witch coming to their door. They all remembered her leaving, but not one of them had seen where she went after that. By the time I'd made my way around the block, I was thoroughly unsettled. It wasn't possible. How could a child visit every house on the street and yet vanish without a trace? How could no one have seen her leave? Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with solving the mystery of the little witch. I scoured local newspapers and online forums looking for any mention of a missing child. I asked around at the elementary school, showing a sketch I'd drawn from memory. I even considered going to the police, though I knew how crazy my story would sound. But I found nothing. No missing children reports, no one who recognized my description. It was as if the little witch had never existed at all. As the weeks turned to months, I began to doubt my own memories. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Or had my loneliness, my sense of loss, somehow manifested this phantom child? It was almost a year later when I got my answer. I was cleaning out my hall closet, sorting through old coats and shoes, when I came across a small, battered shoebox pushed into the back corner. I didn't recognize it, but when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. Inside was a child's drawing, done in crayon on a piece of yellow construction paper. It showed a stick figure in a black triangle dress and pointy hat, standing next to a larger stick figure with brown hair. At the bottom, in the wobbly handwriting of a young child, were the words, "Me and Daddy on Halloween." It was a drawing Emily had made years ago, when she was around 6 or 7. I remembered now. She'd gone as a witch that year, insisting on making her own costume. We'd spent weeks working on it together, laughing and planning. And suddenly, with a clarity that took my breath away, I remembered my wish. Standing on the porch that Halloween night, feeling sorry for myself, I had wished to see my little girl as she used to be. Just one more time. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The little witch hadn't been a ghost or a hallucination. She had been Emily, or rather, a version of Emily from the past, somehow made real by the magic of Halloween night and the power of a father's wish. In that moment, I understood why she had vanished. She couldn't stay. She belonged to a different time, a different reality. Her visit had been a gift, a chance for me to see my little girl one last time before she grew up and moved away. I sat there on the closet floor for a long time, holding Emily's drawing and remembering the little witch's parting words. Be careful what you wish for. Not a warning, I realize now, but a gentle reminder. Our wishes have power, especially on a night like Halloween, when the veil between worlds is thin. In the years since that night, I've come to accept the mystery of what happened. I don't try to explain it or prove it to anyone else. But every Halloween, I sit on my porch and hand out candy, watching the parade of costumed children with new eyes. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of a small figure in a black dress, skipping down the street before vanishing into the night. I don't chase after her anymore. I don't need to. I know now that she'll always be a part of me, a reminder of the magic that exists in the world if we only know how to look for it. And every year, as the jack-o'-lanterns flicker and the leaves rustle in the October wind, I make the same wish. Be safe, be happy, wherever you are. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when my life changed forever. It was Halloween night, 10 years ago, when I was 17 and thought I was invincible. The night my friends and I decided to visit the old Oakwood Cemetery at midnight. We went looking for a thrill, a story to tell. Instead, we found something that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. Millbrook was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, and excitement was hard to come by. My friends and I, there were 5 of us. Me, my best friend Alex, his girlfriend Sarah, our class clown Mike, and the new girl Lily. We were always looking for ways to liven things up. So when Mike suggested we take on the Oakwood Cemetery Challenge, it seemed like the perfect Halloween adventure. The challenge was a local legend passed down through generations of Millbrook teens. The dare was simple. Enter Oakwood Cemetery at midnight on Halloween, make your way to the oldest grave at the center of the cemetery, and leave a token. Simple, right? But Oakwood wasn't your average cemetery. It dated back to the 1700s, when Millbrook was just a tiny settlement on the edge of the wilderness. The oldest parts of the cemetery were overgrown, the gravestones worn and tilted with age. And the stories? Well, every town has its ghost stories, but the tales about Oakwood were enough to make your skin crawl. They said that on Halloween night, the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest in Oakwood. That the spirits of those buried there could reach out and touch the living. That if you listened closely, you could hear them whispering your name. But we were 17, and ghosts were just stories to scare kids. At least, that's what we told ourselves as we made our plans. We met up at 11:30 p.m. at the edge of town where the paved road gave way to a dirt track leading into the woods. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver light over everything. The trees loomed above us, their bare branches clawing at the sky. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, Lily said, hugging herself. She'd only moved to Millbrook a few months ago and was still finding her place in our group. Don't tell me you're scared, Mike teased, elbowing her gently. I'm not scared, Lily protested, but her voice wavered slightly. It's just, don't you think it's disrespectful? To the dead, I mean. I remember feeling a flicker of unease at her words, but I pushed it aside. We're not going to do anything bad, I assured her. Just go in, leave our tokens, and get out. No harm, no foul. Alex checked his watch. It's 11:45. We should get moving if we want to reach the center by midnight. We set off down the dirt track, our flashlights bobbing in the darkness. The woods were eerily quiet. No rustling of small animals, no hooting of owls, just the crunch of our footsteps and our own slightly elevated breathing. The cemetery gates loomed before us, ornate wrought iron that gleamed dully in the moonlight. A heavy chain and padlock secured them. Great, Sarah muttered. Now what? But Mike was already moving, circling to the right. There's a gap in the fence over here, he called back. We can squeeze through. One by one, we slipped through the gap in the fence. I went last, and as I passed through, I felt a strange sensation, like a cold hand brushing against my skin. I shivered, telling myself it was just the night air. Inside the cemetery, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, colder. Our flashlight beams seemed dimmer somehow, barely penetrating the darkness between the gravestones. We made our way deeper into the cemetery, following a winding path between the graves. The newer sections gave way to older ones, the neat rows becoming more haphazard, the gravestones more weathered and ornate. Check it out, Alex whispered, pointing his flashlight at a nearby grave. The stone angel atop it seemed to leer at us, its face distorted by shadows. Guys, Sarah said, her voice tight. Did you hear that? We all fell silent, listening. At first, I heard nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Then, faintly, I caught it. A whisper, just on the edge of hearing. It might have been the wind, but it sounded almost like a voice, like someone calling my name. It's just the wind, I said, but I didn't believe it. None of us did. We pressed on, deeper into the heart of the cemetery. The gravestones here were ancient, some so worn that the inscriptions were barely legible, and all around us, the whispers grew louder. I checked my watch. 11:58. We were cutting it close. There, Lily said suddenly, pointing. That must be it. In the center of a small clearing stood a massive gravestone, more of an obelisk, really. Even in the dim light, we could make out the inscription. Here lies Ezekiel Blackwood, founder of Millbrook. Born 1665, died 1730. May he find in death the peace that eluded him in life. We gathered around the grave, our breath clouding in the frigid air. It was midnight. Okay, I said, my voice sounding strange in the heavy silence. Let's leave our tokens and get out of here. We'd each brought something small, a coin, a ribbon, a smooth stone. One by one, we placed our tokens at the base of the gravestone. I went last, fishing the old brass key I'd brought out of my pocket. As I bent to place it on the ground, I heard it again. My name, whispered so clearly it was as if someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there, just shadows and gravestones. Did you guys? I started to ask, but the words died in my throat. The shadows were moving, not shifting with the movement of our flashlights, but actually moving, flowing like water, gathering and coalescing into shapes, human shapes. Oh my God, Sarah whimpered. Oh my God, oh my God. We huddled together, backs to the gravestone, as the shadow figures drew closer. They were everywhere, surrounding us, their featureless faces turned towards us. And the whispers, they were deafening now, a cacophony of voices calling our names, pleading, demanding. I felt something cold brush against my hand, and when I looked down, I saw a shadowy tendril wrapping around my wrist. I tried to pull away, but it held fast, cold as ice and strong as steel. Lily screamed, high and piercing, and suddenly the night exploded into chaos. Shadow figures lunged at us from all sides. I felt cold hands grasping at me, trying to pull me away from the group. The voices in my head grew louder, drowning out everything else. Stay with us, they seemed to say. Stay here in the dark. Stay forever. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours, but it might have been only minutes. I remember struggling, fighting against the cold grip of the shadows. I remember the terrified faces of my friends, illuminated in flashes as our flashlights swung wildly. And then suddenly, it was over. A distant church bell began to toll, signaling 12:30. At the first peal, the shadows recoiled as if burned. The whispers rose to a fever pitch and then abruptly cut off. The oppressive cold lifted, and we found ourselves alone in the cemetery once more. For a long moment, none of us moved. We stood there, gasping for breath, unable to believe what had just happened. Then, as if on cue, we all began to run. We ran faster than I've ever run in my life, heedless of the gravestones we were dodging, of the branches that whipped at our faces. We didn't stop running until we were out of the cemetery, past the woods, back on the paved road leading into town. Only then did we pause, collapsing onto the ground, our chests heaving. What? What was that? Sarah gasped, her face streaked with tears. None of us had an answer. How could we explain what we'd seen, what we'd felt? Who would believe us? We can't tell anyone, Alex said finally, voicing what we were all thinking. They'll think we're crazy. We all nodded, making a silent pact. What happened in the cemetery would stay between us, but some secrets are too heavy to bear alone. Over the next few weeks, I watched as our once tight group began to fracture. Sarah broke up with Alex, unable to look at him without remembering that night. Mike became withdrawn, jumping at shadows. Lily's parents suddenly decided to move again, leaving town without so much as a goodbye. As for me, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadow figures, felt their cold touch on my skin. I heard the whispers, calling my name, trying to pull me back to that place between life and death. We tried to go back once, a week later, in the daylight. We thought maybe if we could see the cemetery in the sun, it would help dispel the lingering fear. But when we got there, we found the gap in the fence repaired, the gate locked with a new heavy-duty chain. And over the gate, a new sign had been posted, "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." It was as if the cemetery itself was warning us away. In the years since that night, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was an elaborate prank or a shared hallucination brought on by fear and suggestion. But deep down, I know the truth. For one night, we stepped into a world beyond our understanding, a world where the dead aren't quite as dead as we'd like to believe. I left Millbrook as soon as I could, going to college on the other side of the country. But no matter how far I run, I can't escape the memory of that night. Sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I still hear them, the whispers from the graveyard, calling me back. We made a vow that night, my friends and I. We swore we'd never return to Oakwood Cemetery. And we haven't. But sometimes I wonder, did we ever really leave? Or did a part of us stay behind, trapped in that moment when the veil between worlds was lifted and we saw what lay beyond? I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to go back and find out. But I do know this, some dares aren't worth taking, and some stories are better left untold. Because once you've glimpsed the other side, you can never truly come back.
Boo! Did I scare you? No. Well, stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll be the one doing the scaring. Halloween is just around the corner, and let's face it, nothing beats the thrill of a perfectly terrifying costume. But why settle for just scary when you can be scary and stylish? Behold, the harbinger of doom, the ultimate equalizer, the Grim Reaper. But this isn't your grandpa's bedsheet with eye holes. Oh no. This Amazon-exclusive Grim Reaper costume features a flowing, tattered robe that seems to float on air. The deeper casts mysterious shadows, hiding your face in darkness. And check out this scythe. Plastic, of course, but so realistic it'll have your neighbors checking their life insurance policies. But here's the secret, it's surprisingly comfortable. Perfect for a long night of trick-or-treating or haunting your local Halloween party. Now, if you prefer your Halloween with a bit more bite, I want to suck your blood. Normal voice, just kidding, but in this dream girl vampire costume, you might be tempted. This isn't your typical vampire costume. It's sexy, it's sophisticated, it's, dare I say it, bloody gorgeous. The deep red and black dress hugs your curves while the dramatic collar frames your face perfectly. Add the included choker and vampire teeth, and you're ready to seduce the night. Both of these amazing costumes are available right now on Amazon. But wait, there's more. Order in the next 24 hours and get free next day delivery. Plus, join Amazon Prime and get an extra 10% off. That's a deal so good, it's scary. Don't let your Halloween be a nightmare of last-minute costume panic. Order now and make this Halloween a scream. Click the link in the description to order your Grim Reaper or Dream Girl vampire costume now. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more spooktacular deals. Happy haunting, everyone.
Every neighborhood has its secrets, its dark corners that people whisper about but never truly explore. In my neighborhood, that secret was the old Wilkinson house at the end of Maple Street. It stood apart from the other houses, set back from the road, and partially hidden behind a tangle of overgrown trees and bushes. Its windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at the world, its paint peeling like dead skin off a corpse. No one had lived there for decades, not since old Mrs. Wilkinson died back in the 70s. The story went that she'd gone mad after her husband's death, locking herself away in the house and refusing to come out. Some said she died of a broken heart. Others whispered about darker things, suicide, or even murder. Whatever the truth, the house had stood empty ever since, slowly decaying as the years passed. Kids dared each other to touch the front door or peek in the windows, but no one ever went inside. It was just one of those unspoken rules. You didn't go into the Wilkinson house. It was haunted, cursed, dangerous. Everyone knew that. Everyone except me, apparently. My name is Alex, and I was 17 the year I decided to break that rule. It was Halloween night, and I was too old for trick-or-treating, but too young to be invited to any of the cool parties. My parents were out at some neighborhood event, leaving me home alone and bored out of my mind. I remember standing at my bedroom window, watching the younger kids in their costumes running from house to house. That's when my eyes drifted down the street to the Wilkinson house. In the gathering darkness, it seemed to loom larger than usual, its broken shutters flapping gently in the breeze like beckoning hands. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe it was the spirit of Halloween, or maybe just teenage rebellion against the monotony of small-town life. Whatever it was, I suddenly decided that tonight was the night I was going to explore the Wilkinson house. I threw on a dark hoodie and slipped out the back door, not wanting any of the neighbors to see me. As I made my way down the street, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Every distant laugh or shout had me looking over my shoulder. Finally, I stood before the rusted iron gates of the Wilkinson property. They creaked ominously as I pushed them open, the sound seeming to echo in the quiet night. The overgrown path leading to the house was treacherous in the dark, roots and broken concrete conspiring to trip me at every step. Standing on the front porch, I had a moment of doubt. The house loomed above me, somehow both smaller and more imposing than it had looked from the street. The wood of the porch groaned under my feet, and I half expected it to give way entirely. But I'd come this far. I wasn't about to turn back now. The front door was locked, of course, but one of the ground floor windows had a broken pane. Careful to avoid the jagged edges, I reached through and unlocked it from the inside. The window protested as I pushed it up, years of dirt and grime making it stick, but finally it opened enough for me to climb through. I found myself in what must have once been a sitting room. The air was thick with dust, and the beam of my flashlight revealed sheets draped over bulky shapes that I assumed were furniture. Cobwebs hung in every corner, and the wallpaper was peeling off in long strips. As I moved deeper into the house, a sense of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the decay and abandonment. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A heaviness in the air, a feeling of being watched. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination working overtime. Houses couldn't actually be haunted, right? It was just stories, just the product of too many horror movies and campfire tales. The kitchen was a time capsule from another era. Ancient appliances, yellowed linoleum, cabinets hanging off their hinges. A thick layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for years. Or, wait, Was that a handprint on the counter? I leaned in closer, my heart rate picking up. It was definitely a handprint, small like a child's, pressed into the dust. But that was impossible. No one had been in here for years, and there certainly weren't any children living here. That's when I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs, like a footstep on old floorboards. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It had to be my imagination, right? Or maybe an animal, a raccoon or a squirrel that had found its way in. But then I heard it again, and again. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above me. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. Is someone there? No response. Just more footsteps, moving towards the stairs now. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house as fast as I could. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to move as I watched the doorway leading to the hall and the stairs beyond. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and began to descend. Slow, measured steps. Thud, thud, thud. I raised my flashlight, its beam shaking wildly as my hand trembled. The staircase came into view, shrouded in shadows. And there, just at the edge of the light, nothing. There was nothing there. But the footsteps continued, growing closer. I could hear them clearly now, right in front of me, but there was nothing to see. And then, a whisper. So soft I almost missed it, but undeniably there. Alex. My blood turned to ice in my veins. It knew my name. Whatever this thing was, this invisible presence, it knew who I was. Who's there? I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex, the voice came again, louder this time. You shouldn't be here, Alex. This isn't your place, not yet. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the kitchen counter. What do you want? I asked, trying to sound brave, but failing miserably. A chuckle, low and humorless. Want? Oh, Alex. It's not about what I want. It's about what this house wants, what it needs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, my breath misting in the air before me. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, to writhe like living things. You see, Alex, the voice continued, now seeming to come from all around me. This house has been lonely for so long. It needs people. It needs life. And you're just what it's been waiting for. I felt something brush against my arm, cold as ice and yet burning like fire. I jerked away, a scream building in my throat. Don't fight it, Alex, the voice whispered, now right next to my ear. Stay with us. Stay forever. That broke the spell of terror that had held me frozen. With a strangled cry, I bolted for the window I'd entered through. Behind me, I could hear laughter, could feel icy fingers grasping at my clothes. I dove through the window, not caring about the broken glass that tore at my skin. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't stop running until I was back in my own house, the door locked behind me. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking. For a long time, I sat there, trying to process what had just happened. Had it been real, or had my mind played an incredibly vivid trick on me? As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I began to rationalize the experience. The footsteps could have been the old house settling. The whispers could have been the wind, the cold touch. Well, it was a chilly night. My imagination, fueled by years of stories about the haunted house, had simply run wild. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I'd experienced in the Wilkinson house was real. As real as the scrapes on my arms from my hasty exit through the window, as real as the bruises forming where I'd hit the ground. In the days that followed, I watched the old house carefully from my bedroom window. Nothing seemed to have changed. It stood as it always had, silent and brooding. But sometimes, just as the sun was setting, I could swear I saw movement behind one of the upstairs windows. A flicker of shadow, a pale face peering out. I never told anyone about what happened that Halloween night. Who would believe me? But I've never forgotten it either. Years have passed, and I've long since moved away from that neighborhood. But sometimes, in my dreams, I find myself back in that decaying kitchen. I hear those footsteps coming down the stairs, feel that cold touch on my skin, and I hear that whisper, calling my name, inviting me to stay. And sometimes, in those dreams, I say yes. I've learned since that night that there are things in this world that can't be explained, doors that shouldn't be opened. The Wilkinson house was one such door, and I was lucky to escape it. But a part of me wonders, Did I truly escape? Or is a piece of me still there, trapped in that house with its lonely ghosts? Will there come a day when the house calls me back to stay forever this time? I don't know the answers to these questions, and I'm not sure I want to. But I do know this. If you ever find yourself standing in front of an abandoned house, hearing whispers on the wind and feeling eyes upon you, turn back. Go home. Lock your doors and windows tight, because some mysteries are better left unsolved, some thresholds better left uncrossed, and some houses are hungry. They wait in patient silence, year after year, decade after decade, until someone curious or foolish enough comes along, someone like me. So take it from someone who learned the hard way. Respect the secrets of your neighborhood. Leave the abandoned houses to their ghosts, because you never know when a Halloween adventure might turn into a nightmare that follows you for the rest of your life.
And there you have it, 6 true Halloween tales that I hope have sent a chill down your spine. Remember, these aren't just stories, they're glimpses into the unknown, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark side of Halloween, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Sinister Media for more bone-chilling content. Share your own spooky experiences in the comments below. Who knows, your story might be featured in our next video. Until next time, keep looking over your shoulder, because you never know what's watching from the shadows. This is Sinister Media, signing off.